Well, welcome back to Barley and Hops. I'm George. Yeah, we are running that 26-gallon, 4-inch bubble plate with only 4 sections instead of all 6. And again, just as a rehash, that's because I didn't have enough headspace. This is amazing. Yeah, you're right. You got it. We are back in action, and this thing is actually running. I've had this on for about 40 minutes, so my 5,500 watt element at full power has heated this thing up. We are at the point where it should start to do something here real soon, but we wanted to catch it before it does. Right now, I'm at probably about 160 degrees inside the kettle. And of course, in the column, it's going to take a while for all that thermal energy to vaporize that ethanol and that water mixture for it to start to rise. And you can see it's happening because these bottom 2 are starting to fog up, and then the third one will start to fog. So this will take place progressively up my column until I get a really good large volume of vapors in the reflux chamber. Oh gosh, what's going to happen? Oh, I love asking these questions because I know you know it. What's going to happen here is it will start to condense, and all of that liquid will drop back down the column, and it will start to load these plates. That's what we call loading the plates. And we've got our water flow on 100%. Now, remember the 2 options I gave you on the other video about how to actually run a reflux column. And you can either run it traditionally as a pot and then work backwards and then turn your reflux on, or you can run it from the beginning in full reflux and load the column. And that's what we're going to do today. It's relatively straightforward regardless of which way you do it. So what will happen is my head temperature is right now a little bit over 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is right at about 20 degrees Celsius. And I've got an equal temperature in my water cooler because I'm tracking that temperature as well. So that'll tell me when to turn the water cooler on and when to turn it off because I don't need to use it all the time. So the temperature of the water, remember, anything below 70 degrees is fine. And that is what 70 degrees would be about 25 or 26 degrees Celsius, somewhere in that neighborhood. Okay, don't hold me to it. Now you'll see these are starting to fog up. What we're waiting for is the full condensation of vapor. And we'll know that happens when we start to see it drip back down, and it'll start to load these plates. And these plates will load in reverse order from top to bottom because each plate will successively load the plate below it until it loads all 4 of them. Once that happens, we are at a point what we call having a loaded column. Okay, a loaded column just means it's kind of full. Okay, all 4 plates are full. And if we didn't do anything, all it would do is just constantly circulate and recycle and never go anywhere. But we don't want that to happen. See, that's at the point that we want to start to control. And that's where we get our control valve comes into play. Because if we turn down the water flow and we allow some of those vapors to bypass and exit through the deflagmator, they will enter our column. And we'll know that because we'll be tracking the temperature of those vapors as they exit. You see, and then what we'll try to do is strike a happy balance where only at 173, 78 degrees Celsius, somewhere in that neighborhood, and each still's a little bit different, but that's the vaporization point of ethanol. So if we keep it around that temperature, the only thing that escapes is ethanol, and the water keeps dropping out of it. What happens each time that happens? You have ethanol that's separated from the water drops, the ethanol continues. Ethanol separates, water drops, ethanol continues. It becomes more and more pure each time that happens. And with multiple plates, that happens on each plate. You'll have separation of ethanol from water and water dropping. Once it gets to here, it should be as pure as you're going to get it, somewhere around in the azeotropic purity level. Because there's an azeotrope, you'll never get higher than what, 95.6, or is it 96.5? One of those two, okay? You'll never get 100%, but we don't need 100%. So what we're going to do now is we're going to sit back and track this and watch what happens as these start to load and we start to control our water flow. And oh, by the way, we have to control our heat source. Because if we overdo the heat source, then we're out of balance. You have to have the appropriate amount of heat input for a proportionate amount of heat loss. And at the same time, you have to have an appropriate amount of cooling water to remove the heat that we are inputting. Yeah, I know it sounds complicated, but it really isn't. We'll be back with you shortly. I wanted to come back in real quick just to show you something here, because you can see now that our bottom window is starting to clear up, which means that the temperature inside, this is fully saturated, but it's only saturated with vapor because my next window is fogging up and my third window is starting to fog up, but my fourth window hasn't fogged up yet, so my temperature hasn't reached this point. So we're going to continue going. Now, here's the question. I know it's going to come. He says, George, when do you turn the water on? Hey, man, turn it on whenever you want. You can turn it on at the very beginning, because remember, you're just circulating it. It's not like you're losing any. I would say if this would probably be a good point if you were just running it off the garden hose and you were just letting it run out into the yard because you want to conserve water. Now would probably be a good time to turn the water on to allow that to flow. But otherwise, you can turn it on whenever you feel like. Yeah, you can see me making I'm making minor fine adjustments. And remember, every adjustment you make, there's a lagging reaction. So it may take a couple of minutes for something to happen. Now that all my bubble plates are active, they're not violent, they're active. I could increase the violentness or the activity in those bubble plates by increasing the temperature. Or what else could I do? Yeah, I could turn off the water flow and they would become very active until they dried out, because then all of the vapors would be passing through, and I don't want that to happen. So you've got two methods as you can actually see, but you got to find that balance. So what I've done is I've got my temperature, my head temperature, right at about 78 degrees, about 173 degrees Fahrenheit, and all my plates are active. Things seem to be balanced. I'm going to allow that to run for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll make another adjustment. It's just the beauty in action. So initially, all of our adjustments were coarse. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, it's, you make your initial adjustment and you're kind of guessing at that point. Remember, we had all of our windows full and they were bubbling, okay? And then sometimes you'll find an imbalance. I wanted to show you this. You notice my second window is a little bit more full than my third or my first window. So what that's telling me that I'm losing a little bit of reflux or condensing taking place here, and more liquid is flowing to my second jar or my second section as opposed to my third. Now this fourth section is going to be not impossible, but very difficult to find the perfect balance because it's the closest to the kettle. It receives the most thermal energy. So that one, I kind of not ignore that one, but that one's not as important. But when this happens, if I just turn the water flow up a little bit, then what will happen is, turn the water flow down a little bit, well then I'm starting to allow, and you'll notice here that we're starting to show we're at 190 proof. 190 proof on our proof and trail hydrometer, and these are the 4 shots. So I'm making my way through. I'm at about 173 degrees or 78 degrees Celsius, somewhere in that neighborhood. Again, these are not digital thermometers, so you can read them based on your perception of what you're looking at. To me, the process is the most important part of this, and I've got all of these bubble plates bubbling, so I'm going to let it run. Just let it run. 1/2 gallon down. I'm balanced. we're running it at 18.9 amps of the 24 max. And I'm still at a little shot of 173 head temperature, and I've got some aggressive bubble plate activity going on. We're still pumping it out at 190 proof. All I can do now is sit back and watch this thing operate, and make any fine adjustments based on what happens. But in most cases, it should just run on its own, but still needs a little bit of babysitting. We'll return. All right, about an hour and a half into the run, and I've still got some activity going on in all my bubble plates. They're starting to slow down just a little bit, so what can I do? I can turn the heat up just a little bit, but what I'll do is I'll make this slight adjustment on the water flow. I want to increase that just a little bit. There we go. But my temperature at my head is maintained. Everything seems to be running fine. I just let this, we're already into our second half gallon, almost finished. Return shortly. Well, we've just crossed the 1 gallon mark. So I'm still collecting, and we're right below, you can see that, we're right below 190, we're about 188. And it's been there for quite some time. Now, I haven't made any adjustments. I'm just letting this thing run on its own. I'm collecting about a quart every 28 minutes. So that'll give you kind of like a data point of how long you can run this. And again, it all depends on how much you're going to wind up collecting in the long run. And yes, you can go back and look at our videos, and there's a way to figure that out based on alcohol by volume and the volume you have in your still. We're not going into that here, but we've got a little ways to go, and still, what else can I say? I'm steady at 21.1 amps, and I'm 174 degrees at my head temperature, so there's nothing else for me to do but to sit back and babysit this. This brings us to the point where, when do we turn it off? How do we know when we're finished? Well, when we're running a reflux, remember that we're doing the best job we possibly can to separate ethanol from water. But at some point, we've separated all the ethanol. So what happens? What happens in your kettle is that your temperature will start to rise. So during this run, my kettle temperature kind of hovered around 195 degrees or so, because all of that thermal energy was being released by the ethanol being removed and being separated. But when that temperature starts to increase, you know that the volume has changed in the kettle. Also, the volume of that mixture has changed. That's one thing that'll take place. So right now we're at about 203, which is really, really close. I'm at my point of stopping. The second thing that'll happen is I've noticed that my proof has dropped about 4.4 proof points. Now, I can continue to collect, yes, and I'll continue to collect and separate, but it also is going to be very slow, because you've got a lot of activity that has to take place in order to make that separation. So where are we at this point? Well, we are at the tails. Another indicator is going to be, you'll notice that your bubble plates will start to lose effectiveness or activity. You'll notice that my top plate is still operating, but my second plate is slowed down to just a trickle, slight bubbles. My third plate is almost no bubbles, and my last plate, there are no bubbles. So there's no activity at all in that last plate. So what does that tell me? Well, that tells me that what I have left now is I have water left. So what is included in that water once we removed all the ethanol? Now we've got a really high concentration of tails. What do we do at this point? Well, we can continue to run it and try to make that separation. We can kind of make it, we can force it, but why force it when you notice I've got 3 half gallons, and oh, by the way, these are the heads that I collected. You see they're just very, very slightly cloudy. These were my 4 shots. So I've got like about 400 milliliters of 4 shots and just less than a quart of heads at this particular point. Now I think I've collected a little bit too much for heads, but that's okay. I'm really happy with what I've got left over because that is 190 proof, 188 to 190 from start to what I consider finish. So it's time to shut it down. All I can do now, I need to do is shut that off. I'll let the water flow for a little while just to cool it down some, and then we'll start the cleaning process. So in review, this has been an exceptionally fun project. We're at like 2 hours, a little over 2 hours into this. I've managed to run this thing fairly aggressive, but once we get it balanced, we just kind of let it run by itself, and it managed to maintain that balance from start to finish with very little input from us, except for in the beginning when we're making our minor adjustments, when we're trying to balance power versus water flow. But once we get that, this thing runs all by itself, and it's a beautiful thing. Until next time, look, again, comment below, share us with your friends. You know the routine. Subscribe. Happy distilling.